Hello and welcome to Hamwic Speaker's first podcast. And you're here with Jack Irwin. Today we're going to be speaking with Benjamin Jones about his event Courtroom Chaos. Order in the court! Hello Benjamin Jones, thank you very much for joining me this evening. Now this is a chat about Courtroom Chaos, which is one of the biggest events that has been hosted in Hamwic speakers, let alone the area or even the division, maybe even the district, a huge event. So can you tell us what was your main inspiration for Courtroom Chaos?
The first impetus came from Guy McNair Wilson, who was our president of Hamwics, was saying, Benjamin, look, as part of my presidency, I'd really like to do something interesting events. And I don't want the membership to kind of get forgotten about while they're online. And, you know, he was very kind of self-aware that some of the sort of advanced speakers were kind of getting a little bit tedious and bored with some of the repetition. It wasn't because it was wrong. It's just because there's only so much you could do with the online stuff, right? And normally the advanced speakers would be looking to do larger stages or moving into different things. So we needed to find something that was going to test different skills or certainly expand skills in a way they haven't done before. So that was the main thought. So I went away and I drew up about 12 or 15 different types of events that I think would have been quite interesting. And I drew from inspiration from other Toastmasters, and so the simple one might have been the classic reverse style club meeting, everything else. Put it all together and sent that over to Guy. So these are some of the ones I think might be worthwhile. Why don't you sort of pick the first 5 that you think are worth expanding out, something worthwhile. And one of the ones that came to my mind was the Court Chaos. I thought, do you know what? We haven't actually done something like that. And that's a really good use of certainly the English language, and you can do any language, but it happened to be that we're English, and that was the language we wanted to use. And I thought, well, actually, let's explore what this potential has. So I left it with Guy. I think he took it to the committee, and the committee explored it and said, yeah, there's some good work here, and let's start exploring what different types are available. And what does that look like? What does the what does an event like that potentially look like, and where do we go from there? Guy got back to me and said, right, I think these would be the main 3. So we came back with 3 core ones. One was the debate, one was the Dragon's Den, and the final one, which is the crescendo, is Court Chaos. So the debate one, I actually ran myself, and that was, I think, November 2019. And I think I'm stretching my memory now. It was certainly a while ago. 2020 seems a bit of like a write-up. It might be 2020, actually.
Yeah,
we did the debate, and that was building on one that Guy had done, which he'd done with the projector, as you probably well remember. Very fast paced, good fun, but didn't quite work at the time. So that was kind of building upon that, and I retuned that. Now with that, I had the idea of, actually, this is not bad. This is not far off from a kind of courtroom back and forth. I wonder if this is it. Now I wasn't, I left the idea from the Dragon's Den, and I got to go and watch that. And as I watched the conversations happen, I sat and thought, yeah, no, I think I can smush these together actually into something a bit more exciting, a bit more challenging, but certainly something a bit more high level. And I thought, well, what would that look like? So I then wrote up a slightly larger draft and said to Guy, I'm thinking of doing this, and do you think this is a good idea? And Guy is one of these wonderful people. If you come with something that's half good, he goes back and he's like, Benjamin, I love it, make it happen. And it was like, oh, well, that was really responsive, really positive. Okay.
And then he sent the briefing notes, 50 pages of briefing notes.
And I was really, really fortunate because I happened to have a colleague, Amelia Sawingwa, who was able to help me from the Batango Club. And she came on board at the early stages, and she was able to help discuss and talk about it. So I'd created a framework and said, Amelia, because originally at the time, I just didn't have any time. I literally, this project started as me overseeing it. I wasn't even going to be executing it. I was just going to hand it over and say, I've done a framework, go and make of it what you will. I didn't think it was going to become anything to what it became in its final points. So she came on board and she said, look, you've got a good structure. We probably need to, and we had a really lovely creative discussion. One of those exciting ones where, when you're bouncing off people and you go, I think we should do this. You go, no, we can do this. And I'm like, oh my God, that's brilliant. Yes, we should do that. And then she was like, oh, I love it. It's coming. So that all came together in a really beautiful synergy. And then she said, but you've got a slight problem, right? I can see where you come from the debate thing, and I can see where you're working in, but you haven't got the 2 major things. What are you on about? What do you mean I'm missing the 2 major things? You haven't got the how, and you haven't got the why. Oh yeah, I'd forgotten about that all the way. So how do I weave that in? So this then caused the whole thing to be reworked. And then as we were talking through the rework and we were saying, we started then quoting the inspiration. So you had like, when I was growing up, I was exposed to things like Ally McBeal. So you started to think about all the dirty little techniques they might use in it. So, the squeaky shoes or the distractions to try and, put the judge off and not look at the case too deeply.
Objection, my lord. 1 minute, the defendant isn't an expert on bioweapons, and the next minute he is an expert on bioweapons.
And then you had some more of the recent ones. So you've got the good fight in modern culture. You've got Goliath. You've got other things like CSIs, the Law and Orders. So all of the popular culture ones started to paint an image. Now, I was super fortunate because 1 year prior to that, would you believe, I'd actually had to do jury service. So I was like, well, I'm really lucky. This is still fresh in my head and I've got a reasonably good memory. So I was like, I remember all the bits, how the components went, what they were saying, why we did certain things. And I remember years ago for my A-levels, 2002. So I hadn't looked at anything law or legal related. I'd been on TV for, 15 years. So with that in mind, I now had a good framework, some good popular culture. And the next thing I needed was a story. And this is where Guy comes in. So Guy, being the notorious, let's stir up and make something exciting out of it, said, have you ever heard of the Lord Lucan story? I said, no, what's the Lord Lucan story? So I then, being the tenacious individual I am, was like, I'm going to go and research this. Now I want to know, what is this Lord Lucan story? And suddenly I was like, right, I see what's going on here. So there's a mystery, there's lots of questions, the unanswered questions. So then I thought, well, what other books do I like that I've read that had me hooked? And I said, well, I love the Dan Brown one. I explored so many exciting things. What got my teeth into that? It had to be the mystery. So I was like, well, but there had to be a bit of darkness to it. There had to be a kind of shroud of mystery of, oh, hang on, this is something that maybe we shouldn't be looking at. It's hidden, it's secret, it's who knows. We like to understand and uncover mystery. It's part of that what makes us human. That's why we have such good research in the world. That's why we're always trying to move things forward, because we're curious creatures. And so with that in mind, I then had the inspiration to, right, this is the creative part. Let's start considering, what does this look like? And as this came together, I had a creative story, mystery, and unpicking of that mystery. I'm then thinking, well, actually, I've got my genetics and genomics background. I'd love to find a way to weave in what's an exciting technology that's going to be part of our lives forever now, but obviously made much more apparent with, pandemic and everything else, but certainly something of this gravity. Why are we not considering this? This is a wonderful medium to convey something I'm excited about that would happen in real life. Not so much in the practicality, but principally, you could have these things. If people are looking about doing these creative endeavors, understand that when you weigh people in, you're weighing them in at different points, right? You sort of put your heart on paper and say, so the first people were Amelia and I had Guy, and they were very gracious and they kind of let me kind of mold it out a bit more. Then I brought new people in and they brought it out. But every stage of that was understanding, who am I bringing in and why? Because you want to keep it enough of a egg to begin with. If you do it too quickly, people will just flatten it and you'll get nothing. But if I build it out just enough, it got to that beautiful stage where I was like, yeah, this has got a life now.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, thank you for your attendance today.
I find quite a few points in there really interesting, especially your point about you're making a creative idea and you're making it happen, which is a very difficult thing. And you're bringing people on board and the idea's changing, it's fluid, and you're just pulling in the right people at the right time to make this egg grow. I find that really fascinating. Also, I really liked how you the seeds at the beginning. One of your inspirations was Guy's debate event, and it just shows within a club, one event can lead on to another. So I'm really excited for what could possibly come in the future.
That's a great way of looking at it. I hadn't considered that. Yeah. So what will this be the impetus to in the future? Yeah, I like your thinking. I haven't even thought that far ahead. That's genius. So well done. Yeah.
Well, you were saying foundations, so there's a few buildings to be built if we go along the punnage line.
In my own capacity as court justice, I will continue to monitor the proceedings as the prosecution makes their case. Counsel, you may commence in your own time.
This event was a real test for the speakers. I mean, they had to really engage their Toastmasters brain to speak. A lot of it was impromptu. What was the main challenges you wanted the speakers to face?
Most of the skills that we're doing, almost all the Toastmasters at a certain level have. What they haven't done is a combination of using them all at the same time and under pressure. And That's not quite true, because you wouldn't necessarily have to embody a character, and you probably wouldn't necessarily have backstory. So there's also additional layers I'm adding, extra dimensions that make it just a little bit more challenging. But we're weaving in core skills. So when you play through, for example, yeah, okay, you've got a semi-prepared speech at the beginning. There's a degree of adaptation, so you have to actively listen. You're then taking on the impromptu stuff, but you're making a coherent argument, and you've got to do this not only under pressure, but every word is premium real estate. You are losing seconds, and if you are not conveying your point, you're not just losing the audience or even the judge, you're weakening your case. So you're heading towards, Loserville at a rate of knots at every possible moment. And I said, having lost the lead prosecution, so I know what it was like to try and do that, and it was a real good challenge, and it kept me on my toes. That event for all of the speakers was like, you could have flicked a light and it would have been over. That's how the adrenaline was. And I had some real advanced speakers coming to me, Benjamin, I've got butterflies in my tummy. I haven't felt butterflies in my tummy. I did public speaking for for a long time. So they were excited. And I thought this is a good thing, because it means that all of them were pushing themselves right to the edge. They've not done this before. They've not had to do an impromptu speaking.
Firstly, it is not up to me and my defense team to explain what happened here. It is for the prosecution to prove it. Secondly, there is not a shred of real evidence in anything they say that proves the guilt of the defendant.
Because whilst everyone saw you saw the theatrics, that was great. You saw hopefully well-spoken, good language and well-constructed arguments, that was great. You saw responding to changes and everything else. What people maybe didn't see or didn't consider is the extra layer of strategy and tactics. Now, people don't consider this when speaking, but have you ever considered you want to lure someone into a position where you can then have a 1-2? Well, you might open up with a particular question. I might open up, for example, with a question that I know the defendant counsel are going to attack. I want the objection. I want the objection because I want to either get the information out there, let the jury hear it, even if I then retract it. I might want the conversation to go a particular way because I want the opposition to think that they have the upper hand. And then I bring in the number 2, which is actually we've got evidence that completely refutes that. And you can imagine that if you spent a lot of time constructing, thinking, I've just come up with this fantastic argument, every rebuttal, every counterattack is also a potential framework waiting to be falling apart. So to have that moving at pace, that was just something I don't think has ever been done before.
There is absolutely no indication of any facial disfigurement on the body itself.
I can see how complex that really is. To think that there's strategy on top of this improv, where they're thinking about how the listeners are potentially digesting what they're saying and how they're feeling.
Yes.
So you've got to somehow understand how the audience is feeling, and it's almost it is in a way a form of manipulation.
Yeah, I mean it's probably fair saying it's more of a spectrum, right? Because there's an argument that it's probably more persuasion at certain times, and then as it moves to the more darker end of the scale, it's manipulation. Obviously, for these events, it's all fun, but I think it lives up to the concept of chaos when you realise that this is all going on. And the trick is and this would be good for the listeners if they get a chance to watch the video and say, which ones lost their composure, which ones stayed calm under fire, because that is probably the hardest bit. Your mind is working at 90 to the dozen, and you're thinking, oh, well, that's great. My entire argument is now completely vetoed. How do I come back from the jaws of defeat? And the other side are thinking, well, I can't rest at this moment because at any moment the tide is going to turn. And you highlighted a really great point, which is, and I haven't spoken much about that, but I think, in passing, and you've encapsulated it beautifully, which is our audience. Everything we do at Toastmasters is about our audience and keeping the audience with us on that journey. That was hard. That was probably the hardest part, I think, because at every point I was thinking, oh, but I really want to explore this as like, Benjamin, you just don't have time. You got 7. I mean, my original amount for the primary witnesses was 4 minutes. 4 minutes to convey some of that complexity. And I realized by the second rehearsal, I was like, they can't do it in 4 minutes. Not if you want to have a coherent, fluid dialogue. And you needed time to have that digestion. And just to very quickly segue back to the architecture, we had to have the usher do the transition sections because we recognized that for our audience, if we didn't have those breaks, so they just had 15 seconds to go, that segment's over, moving on to second segment, just that breather to go and let it kind of disappear into the filing cabinet of the brain. We just knew we would lose the audience. And that would have been travesty because the event would have been a complete failure.
I found him to be a very flaky character with absolutely no sense of duty.
a court case within 2.5 hour time frame when they usually go on for, days, weeks. It's incredibly condensed, incredibly rich, and there was some amazing use of communication in that, not just verbal, but you could see the emotions conveyed. Some really great performers. And from your aspect, you put on a great performance as well. And I'd like to know, and the audience would probably like to know, you've got 180 people watching this. How do you prepare yourself? I mean, you must have felt nervous and
So there's a couple of things that I use and everything else. So speaking at that level is you kind of get used to the concept that people are watching. So you have to kind of take this may or may not be right, but this is what I do, which is just assume that you're right, because like we've done with some of the contests that you don't get to see your audience, you just like if you're doing a humorous speech, you just have to assume you're funny. And I suppose that confidence then comes across, and it's a bit like you've been to meetings, right, where you've got a confident Toastmaster. You feel you're in safe hands. And like all I could think about through all of this is like, this isn't for me, this is the audience. So if I'm not confident, they're not going to trust me. If they don't trust me, I'm letting them down. So I can't let the nerves get to me. And I heard a brilliant thing that someone said to me, nerves are vanity. And I was like, that's a clever way of looking at it. And so that made me, I then sort of reflected upon that and thought, that's probably true, actually. Why would I be, and I think I've said to you before, and one of the things that was once said to me, and I loved it, which was, this is more when we were doing our face-to-face meetings. If you're feeling self-conscious, you've forgotten who you're doing this for, because you're not there for you, you're there for the audience. And so that process then sort of, you scale it up. The nice thing about being online is, well, I haven't got to go anywhere, so that's quite easy. But you also still want to get yourself in the mindset. So I use a couple of tricks. One of the tricks I do is just remember that, is this going to kill me? Am I under any immediate threat? There's maybe my ego, there's maybe my pride, two things that probably wouldn't do, terrible being bashed a little bit. I've been bashed plenty in life, so you bounce back from it. But ultimately, is it going to kill me? Probably not. It's going to be a learning lesson, and it was always going to be a prototype. The fact that it was a huge success, that is a winner chicken dinner, right? The main thing was it was a learning exercise. Did we come away and learn loads? We learned so much. That was just in the construction of it, let alone the actual performance. And I'm still chasing up with them, and I will be over the next couple of weeks and months of compiling new stuff because there's loads of learning. The other thing I use is getting myself into a kind of like a vibratory state that I feel is the zone. We get into flow state. What does the flow state feel to me? Well, I knew that once I transitioned into the performance stage, I was no longer the contest organizer. There was the point where that hat came off and I was like, I'm in there. And I said to obviously the functionaries, and I said to everyone participating, once this kicks off, I am no longer the organizer. I will not be able to answer organizer questions. If it's an in event, you'll have to speak to David. If it's an out event, you'll have to speak to the exec project committee, which was comprised of obviously Kit for doing the technical. Thank you, Kit. You are a legendary guru when it comes to those things. And without you, this wouldn't have worked. You then had Barbara, who was obviously acting as the kind of logistics liaison with very different things. And then you had Guy, who was kind of the PR. So these people then had to take on a different role during the event. Obviously, Guy was there presenting the president and everything else. So as those things were taking over, I could then step into that role. And I would then use some music, just kind of get myself into what am I doing in this role? I'm here to convey this, and I'm here to win. I'm not here to not lose. I'm here to win. So the music was ticking along the background. We've got some personal preference choices there. Getting into that kind of war music. Like I've got to win, because in a minute, and the way I looked at it was, I was an athlete, a verbal athlete. I wasn't running places, but I had to get into that frame of zone. That I'm like, okay, in a second, I'm going to have to go at pace. And if I haven't got at least a kind of, I can do this, I'm going to win, you're going to trip over yourself. And so you can't allow doubt at that stage to enter it. And I think the final thing to consider was, I don't know what the terminology would be to describe this, but it was kind of like fatigue syndrome, which was apathy. I don't care now anymore. It's so close to the deadline. I have to just do it. It has to happen. So it doesn't matter whether I'm nervous or whether it's not good enough or it's not perfect enough. It was never going to be perfect. It was never going to be perfect enough. And I was never going to have enough time to prepare. So there's kind of like, and we do this in Toastmasters all the time, right? We set ourselves a deadline and we go, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it, because the worst case scenario is I benchmark myself and I come away, and we could come away from this event and it's it might have sat at maybe like a 60% average. Certainly from the stuff I've read, it seems to be sitting at around about 80% for a prototype. I mean, if you enter the academic world, that's take 10% over an A. So that's 10% wasted extra effort you might be if you're really cynical. But for this event, I just thought, yeah, that was fantastic. So that would, in my mind, convey that from a prototyping point of view, we went way above and beyond. And that I think was in part getting into that role, understanding, I know what my role is, I want to be in the zone, and then when I'm in that zone, let it happen. There's a great phrase that I've got from a guy from Twitter, and I can't remember his name, but I'll come back to you on that one. But he just says, let it trade. In other words, just like, it's got to happen, right? And as it plays out, we'll deal with the pieces afterwards.
Mother, who is this person? And she said, Fabio, I lied to you. I lied all your life.
Hi listeners, we're now halfway through the podcast. Thank you very much for listening this far. As you can tell, there's a hell of a lot of work that's gone into this project, so really appreciate your support in listening to this, and hopefully it inspires you to do some events yourself. Hamwic podcast, it's for you, it's all for you. Can you think of a particular highlight of the entire event? Is there one moment or one thing that you'll never forget, really memorable?
I mean, there's probably a few, but probably the most funnest part, and I apologize, is my audio coming through okay? Sorry, I've got a washing machine on the background. I apologize if it's coming through. There's probably a few I could choose, and I'm going to go with probably, it's a little cliche, but it probably was the most fun for me, which was grilling the international president. That was real fun, in part because I was just blown away with this guy's ability to actively listen at a pace that, even our advanced speakers, even I couldn't keep up. I could speak at a rate of knots. Your listeners will probably go, I wish you'd slow down. But if I'm speaking and I think that I sound slow, and that the guy I'm speaking to is able to listen at twice the speed and regurgitate it back in a very, very well-constructed argument, and if you get a chance to see it, listeners, honestly, there's a reason why he's the international president, right? I mean, that was just battered away as if, I do this every single day. This is not even a challenge. And that was fun, right? Because it was really good to see. So what is it when you reach sort of like, I would argue probably the zenith of your career in Toastmasters? What does that look like? And my understanding, and I may well be wrong, and obviously you can fact check this, but I think Richard, if I'm correct, comes from an engineering background. And what was real fun was that moment when I threw a question at him, and you could see his eyes go to the sort of top left, and he was obviously recalling the words that I said, rearranging that analytically, having a pause moment, and in those few seconds, which probably seems like nothing to us, but might have been a lifetime for him to go, I know exactly how I'm going to respond to this argument. I'm going to construct a really beautiful and virtually unassaultable response, which he then delivered unbelievably eloquently, and left me grasping at straws going, I've got to find something now to come against this, because this is really good. Fortunately, I ran out of time because I was getting very desperate as to how I was going to tackle this individual. And, for a large spot, he really vetoed my case and put a lot of damage into it. So it does show when done well, it can be good. And there's lots of other bits I could point out that I find out, but that was, for me, was one of my favorite highlights.
And here is a clip of Benjamin sparring with the world president of Toastmasters.
But I have a question for you, sir. It perplexes me. Given your time and your contacts with DARPA, and indeed the industry complex, you are sworn to secrecy, are you not, under the Secrets Act of the CIA? So you are under no obligation to admit any truth under witness of perjury. Is that not true, sir?
Well, I think that catches you in quite an interesting situation, doesn't it? Because if I'm held under an oath not to perjure myself, because I can't share secrets, that I come to a court where perjury would put me in its own particular situation, then why would I come forward as a witness?
Indeed, sir. The absence of your information is somewhat informational. So by saying that you have nothing, you are in fact saying that you do know something but cannot say it.
Well, I think that's what you're saying. That maybe you have nothing,
That is exactly
and you're trying to. Maybe you have.
Counsel, the court politely implores you to get back in your box and let the witness speak.
That deep American voice, it just had so much, that I shouldn't even pretend to do it, but it just had so much gravity. What he was saying, you thought was gospel. I thought was gospel, right? Whatever this guy said, I trust him. And this is the answer, it's almost dangerous when someone has that amount of, maybe it's because we knew his title before. I wonder if we would have viewed it the same if we knew he wasn't the world president
and that's a really good point, right? Because I don't want people to get fixated on titles. Titles can act as a deflector. It's a bit like prefixes. The second you put like the doctor in front of someone's name, they're immediately smart, right? Well, yes and no. And it's important to understand, what do we define as brilliant or smart or expectation wise. What made this so fun was because I was looking forward to seeing what's it like for an international president in this particular instance to experience something different, because it's well and good being, repeat processes and have that degree of formality, which you can get quite polished at. You've probably got a range of set pieces that you would pull off the chair and you go, okay, I can do this one quite well. It suits. So a little bit of improvisation, but this was like, he really had no idea what was coming. So that was a great way of validating how well had the Toastmasters system worked on this individual. And it's like, very well, because he'd obviously got very good at doing his impromptu speaking and under pressure and on a complicated subject. Like, a lot of people wouldn't have taken that role lightly. And Richard he leapt it. He just thought, yeah, this is great fun, and certainly the emails we had back and forth, he was very much up for this from day one. He was never perturbed by any of this. And, I get to look back and say, do you know what? My credit history is I got to grill one of the international presidents, and he'd be sitting there thinking, yeah. And I responded, and you were nothing. And it was like, yeah, but it was good fun all the same. So I got to enjoy myself during the whole process, and I can take that away.
Well, Benjamin, having seen and heard of how much work you've put into this, I think that's the icing on the cake. Richard Peck, the world international Toastmaster president, visiting this event, and I think it's fully deserved, because the amount of work behind the scenes, not just yourself, you mentioned earlier a friend of yours, and various people throughout as well have got involved. There was a huge amount of involvement in this project, wasn't there?
Oh, phenomenal. I mean, at a certain point I will write this all up and put this into pen to paper, so that people have got some more details to pick it apart, because my learning from this has been phenomenal. So just two things to take away that I've learned, certainly on my mini journey at the moment, and that's discernment and division, right? And the division is the concept of division of labor. When you suddenly realize, actually, it's a real art form to be able to divide segments and give it to the right person to do the right thing, hence the discernment. And the discernment is also understanding, when are you going to pull time, or when are you going to invest it? And at every moment, you're constantly learning, because anything can change. A precipitating event can come in, and you go, I was going to invest a lot of time in that. That's not appropriate. Or I am going to do this. And that then came down to the people as well, because once I delegated a lot of this stuff out, I was relying on. A great example was my counterpart, which is Alan Hagan. So Alan Hagan was our defense lead counsel. He was so capable with his role, he didn't need too much guidance, talked about what was required. He went off and then organized his own team. And I gave him a helping hand. I gave him David Matoi, you see, and those two together are just, unstoppable forces in nature. And David Matoi will laugh, because when he read his role, he just said to me, Benjamin, this role is written for me. And I was like, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because I feel like I've just shot myself in the foot. But he then ran with it really well, and he was able to work with the impromptu witnesses and the standard witnesses and put it all together. And so we had Jorge from Mexico who delivered the famous fish speech that I think will go down in history, one of the most funniest parts of it. And it wasn't necessarily designed to be excessively funny. It was just meant to be as a small humor. But you couldn't help but be endeared because of the way that story spun and where it took you. And I just sat there and thought that creative direction was not given by me. I don't know if it was even given by the prosecution. I think, and it's one of those things that just came naturally from his perspective, how he saw it coming together. Yeah. So as each of these individuals did it, I had Arnu as my co-counsel, our district director, real pleasure to be working with someone quite high up in the echelons from our district. And he was coming up with the creative stuff. And then you had Carol, who was obviously the professor, and she was saying, actually, I think I can perform it this way. This will convey this information. Matt coming in from DCS Roseblade. Every person along that line, I hope I mentioned all of them. I'm trying to think, obviously, and of course, I can't forget one of the most important characters, which was David. David Sexton, who was our usher. And, I hate to use the term pack horse because he did get lumbered with so much, but Whilst I'm on the one hand barking out all these directions and trying to make it all happen, he's sitting there putting all these things in his back, going, right, I'll get this done, I'll get this done. And, you know, and if you ever want to typify what David is, when I sent the 50-page over document to David, everyone else had like a heart attack and broke down. And David got back to me like a few days later and said, yeah, I've read that, this is great. Completely unfazed by the concept of what and you know we've worked well together in the past, and Dave knows how I put things together, and he likes that because it's thorough. But when you put all of these people and they're linking together, each one has that complementary effect. Hence why I said, and you know, a good example is how these all then sort of circulated around Fabio, who's obviously one of our most accomplished speakers. With I think, correct me where I'm wrong, but I think he reached the semi-finals, and you needed someone who was going to be confident enough to take quite a battering, because their role basically hinged on a degree of depending on how they wanted to do it. So we had that creative freedom. Yeah. And I didn't want to oversubscribe the role, but I also needed to know that I need someone who's going to adapt in a way that I can't overmeasure, because if I overmeasure, I'm going to stifle the natural flow. And as I said, we just got so lucky with all these people. And as they came together, their natural personalities either happened to match the roles or flourished in them really well, which is even better. But each of them carried a significant load. And that's the point, right? You need these people to be able to be trustworthy enough to say, I'm giving you this. And some people needed more effort than others. And that was part of my discernment learning. Like, would I have done things differently? Yeah, because as I learned how certain people worked, I was like, you needed a longer run in. I should have started earlier with you. And other people, I'm like, here's a list of bullet points, go and do it. And some people just ran with it and they needed very little impetus. Other people needed a lot of hand holding. And it was dependent on what the context was, right? So that was a real good learning one for me. And something as a leader, I think people underestimate that. But when you come away from that, you not only learn how you operate, you then start to appreciate the value of, once I understand how somebody else operates, I really know how to get the best out of them. And that makes my life easier as a leader.
That sounds amazing. You've created an opportunity for yourself to really grow and develop in project management, and surrounded yourself with some incredibly talented speakers. Just a pointer for the audience. If anyone's considering doing an event on this scale, what advice or tips would you give them? Can you condense it into maybe 3 points?
I would have said, if you're doing a project like this from scratch, you want to give yourself a year, and you do want to have, so I couldn't use the high performance committee one, high performance leadership project, because you need to create a committee to do that, and that's to help act as your steering committee. Now, it would have been great if I'd had more planning and various things allowed that to have done that, because you then get a bit of direction steering, and it also helps you to consider, are you going off track? I got really lucky with this, and the people I had, and certainly the way it turns out. So you could argue that's a bit of a statistical anomaly, but for the most part, having that extra support is really good for you as an organizer, because there comes a point where actually there's maybe things that they can help you with that you're not seeing. You need those fresh pair of eyes. Now, I'm of the nature of always asking people for extra input. So certainly when it comes to that, preparation is key. Don't be afraid to have a longer run in. And sometimes it depends on what you're doing. In a prototype event, you might want to do it short because you're just fumbling through. Like, we had lots of it. And on that second, so the second point for preparation is practice. We needed those practice runs, not because we wanted to refine our scripts and get them perfect, because we needed to understand functionally, what is it like when you're doing this? There were so many things in our story. Like, if you'd seen the original cases that we put forward to each other, they completely changed. They had to, because not only were they weak or were they lacking, but they actually didn't make sense. And so we suddenly going, do you know what? This has just demonstrated that what we've put on paper and we think is coherent and makes sense doesn't make sense when you're listening to it back or when it's being challenged. And a great example and a fantastic moment was when I called Guy up as one of the impromptu speakers during rehearsals. He then sat there and he embodied this fantastic, I think it was South Londoner accent. And he kind of completely destroyed my case by saying the wrong thing. And so the defense completely capitalized that. And we suddenly realized, do you know what? Had I not functionally tested that and thrown someone in the deep end, that would have gone down really badly online. So that practice allowed us to then say, do you know what? There is detail here. There's value. So it's preparing it and getting organized. That's getting the framework, the ducks in a line, how you're going to execute, having the story, having it all written out and trying thinking as much as possible. But then there's the practice. That's really fumbling through. And then the final part, I think, from an event this size is you need to be passionate about what it is you're doing with the why. Why were we doing this? This was for Toastmasters. This was going to be a fun event. It needed to be something that I had an interest to. I had enough of a value interest. So for me, I got the opportunity to talk about genetics and genomics in a new way and benchmark my skills and test my ability to lead a high performance group, right? So that's quite a new area. I've not done something like that before. And then these were very advanced, very great speakers. And to give you an example of that is our judge, Ben Slorian, for example. So you want to talk about incredible preparedness there. I had to give him 96 hours to take on that role because of various things that happen and change, which is part of managing chaos. And as you're working through this ambiguity, you suddenly realize that if I didn't have the passion and the dedication of these people, they wouldn't have said, I'm going to stay up at 11 o'clock at night, or, okay, I'm going to give up my Saturday to do this. Or when I sat there on the phone and I was on the phone to people, I was like, it's 14th of February. I need you on a Zoom call to do a run haul. And they're like, that's Valentine's Day. I'm like, yeah, I know. But if you've got 2 weeks to this event, we've got to do it. And everybody showed up. Everybody showed up, right? And they were there, some were more happy than others, but broadly speaking, they got onto it. We knocked through it. So when you combine those three, I think that's when you have preparedness, you've got the practicality, so you've done the testing, any good experiment. And then finally, it's the passion, right? There's something that's going to help you. Grit is just going to pull you through that line as if to say, I will finish this if it kills me, but I will finish it. And I think that's the final recommendations I would have to people.
Thank you, Benjamin. And I'd just like to point out that you had over 18 people actually just starring in this Courtroom Chaos event. And none of them are paid. This is entirely voluntary. So for you to get them to come to these rehearsals, to read these scripts, to take on these roles, that takes not just passion, really inspiration. So that's a brilliant feat. What's next on Benjamin's horizon? Where are we going with this?
So the first immediate thing is going to be compiling and learning. So I'm reaching out to each of the members and I'm asking, what do they like? What do they not like? And I've already thought of a better way of doing the jury part. In fact, we've actually got some quite exciting things. And some of the aspects to the way it played out were limited by technology. So like, for example, we couldn't do breakout rooms on the webinar style. That was a real shame because there was aspects in there where we could have started to have more audience involvement and that would have been more fun. So I'm hoping that once that technological hitch is overcome, Court Chaos 2.0 will be much more interactive and that will be fun because that will integrate nicely with the kind of Toastmasters theme, right? We want people to be interactive because that's testing their ability to show or demonstrate their active listening. That is probably part of a kind of precursor to other events. So we're experimenting. I think Guy's got a couple of other projects that I'll be weighing in certainly from a consultancy point of view, which is a sort of wedding style chaos one and a disaster chaos one. And I can see where he's going with that. And they are probably going to build out on similar templates, but the idea is, it's moving at pace and it's building that. And I think a lot of it's a case of where do we see the gaps in the market for what these projects are going to deliver. And by market, I'm referring to like what skill sets are missing from the repertoire of some of our highest and advanced speakers. And it might not even just be the skills that are missing. It's just the opportunity to practice them in a way that they've not had done before, because, staleness, for example, will disengage you. So you need something to do that. I think the other things that I really do enjoy or am contemplating is whether there is enough meat to this to turn it into an actual novel or something bigger, maybe a screenplay. And that's something that I'm actually looking into quite seriously, because at first I was just thinking this is fun, but whether it's something bigger, I don't know. It's got potential. So I'm excited by what the prospects might be for this, but I'm equally excited for the fact that and I think you said this in the conversation we had earlier, if not on this call, but certainly previously, which was this is like an impetus to something else. So where it leads, I never expected it to lead just here, but there's no reason, for example, that this couldn't become a new pathway. There's no reason that we couldn't sit there and say, actually, a project of this magnitude, maybe it's I don't know where other people would rate it. You see, though, is it a level 5 one? Is it something higher because of having to pull in the VIPs and manage, different things there? So I think there's probably a discussion for the Toastmasters, higher echelons to say, well, actually, if we are going to do this event on a regular basis, what does this look like? Because I could look at that segment and say, well, do you know what? You could probably extract smaller segments of it and do those at lower levels just to start building a program towards what would eventually be the crescendo, which is what we ended up with at Court Chaos. But if you were maybe working in the legal field or working in, maybe not in the legal field, maybe it's just something that, you had to experience. Maybe, for example, you're going to be an expert witness. and you want practice to know, what does it feel like to be grilled by it? How am I going to get ready? We haven't, at least to my knowledge, we haven't at least explored that in Toastmasters. And there's a real good understanding, which is, well, maybe lawyers, for example, want a test place to put their cases forward. You know, they want to literally test an concept in front of a lay audience, because they're going to be doing it in front of jury members. There is such a potential to help a profession that is probably under a tremendous amount of strain. So whether that becomes something more viable, that would be wonderful to see. But at the moment, my immediate plan is consolidate all the learning, rewrite my 50-page document in probably to a 70-page document, because I've already got some great ideas about where to go. And as always, and I stress this, and you know me well better than most, I just want to say, which is, I want the feedback, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because there's going to be learning from there. And in certainly some of the speeches I've seen you do, you're exactly the same, which is like, you know, if it's not working, tell me. You know, it really is so true. But if without that information, you can't go away. And it's not all going to be used, but it certainly gives me a pretty good direction of where I need to be heading, and that would be exciting.
Something I touch on, you said a little early on, is that creating a challenge. You believe there's a gap in the market to create a challenge and test speakers more, and you're thinking about how it relates to the real world. People going into courtrooms and lawyers. That's absolutely brilliant, and I think you can really provide value to people's lives. That's for sure. Well, Benjamin, it's coming up to the end of the podcast. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our devout listeners at Hamwic Podcasts?
What I would say to your listeners as a sign-off is go and check it out. Give me some feedback, or certainly feedback to Jack. And I really want to just know, for example, what do you think is missing? Because ultimately, a problem identified is something like 75% solved, right? And a problem is maybe not a fair way of saying it. It's just asking ourselves, going, we've got the capacity to be as creative as we want, right? The restrictions are not what we think they are. And that applies to lots of things in life. You know, we've seen that in many dimensions of it, from economies to politics to you name it. We have these preconceived ideas of what is and isn't possible. And then it's a case of us asking, where did that idea originate from? Because if I was to work on the basis that I can't create an event because it's not part of the Toastmasters roster, that's small-minded thinking. That is not a growth mindset. And every Toastmaster I've met, to some form of demand, has the growth mindset. So when you're listening to this and you'll be thinking, can I do this? The answer is yes. The question is when and how, not if. And I think when you go away tonight and you sit there or whenever you listen to this, just start asking yourself, okay, what would be my first smaller project? And then how is it going to do? And once you've got a passionate project, this is kind of where it went with me. As I started to ask more people for their input, they really just injected the fuel. And all I did was started spinning the plates faster. And then as we all started spinning it, it was everyone's job to try and catch up and stop them crashing. Next thing we know, we'd finished spinning the plates and we were looking back on the work done going, wow, that was a heck of an event. Shall we do another one?
Brilliant. That's a really inspirational thing to finish on, Benjamin. I like how you were talking about just be creative, try not to limit yourself, put yourself in that growth mindset. That's fantastic. Well, that concludes the podcast. Thank you very much for joining me, Benjamin. It's been really great to hear about this event that had so many people involved, and also the international president as well. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me on, and good luck with the rest of it.
Thank you. Well, listeners, thank you for listening all this way through. And now I'm just going to finish with a recording from the world president of Toastmasters, Richard Peck. Enjoy.
Hamwic speakers, this is defense witness Sir Richard E. Peck, sending along a quick message to say thank you for such a tremendous event. I only regret that my schedule was so busy that I was not able to attend very early or stay very late. When I was asked to attend this, I was told this was not a theatrical presentation. I would beg to differ. This was truly, truly a theatrical presentation, and one to be proud of. As I listened to the individuals who were presenting and speaking, as I watched the gallery so involved, and the judge doing his best to keep control of the situation, This was truly a memorable event for me. I also got a chance to see some old friends and witness them in action. There was no way you were going to convict Fabio. He was clearly innocent. But it was a lot of fun trying. I wish you much success. I hope to have the opportunity to meet with you again in the future. And if you ever hold another event, please feel free to send the invite. Stay safe and stay healthy until we can meet again. And keep up the good fight of persecuting those individuals who have done wrong. Take care, my friends. Be safe.
That concludes tonight's recordings. There's nothing left. There's no more. So it's time for bed. It's time for you to stop listening. Court dismissed. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Hamwic Podcast.